Hello, and welcome to the Business of Us podcast, where we explore the intersection of business, relationships, and family life. This season, we're focusing on the concept of the three mountains of partnership, purpose, and passion. And they're the three big challenges that all couples are going to face throughout their relationship. So, whether you're scaling your first mountain or learning to navigate life after the summit, these episodes will give you stories, strategies, and inspiration for the journey. It's my pleasure to introduce my co host, Jamie Bourne, a licensed therapist who works globally with EO and YPO members, entrepreneurs, and their families, helping them to navigate the unique pressures that come with high-performance business and high-stakes relationships. Jamie is a sought-after speaker, retreat leader, and workshop facilitator, and she's truly passionate about helping entrepreneurs and their families to navigate the intersection of mental, relational, and family wellness.
Thanks, Cameron. It's also my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Cameron Medill, who founded a multi-million-dollar company that he sold to his team in 2019, which led him to realize his true passion is helping people build strong relationships. He has conducted original research with over 600 entrepreneurs and their spouses to understand how thriving relationships drive both personal well-being and sustainable success. You can read his work at relationshipscienceguide.com. And today he runs the Happy Couples Project, focused on experiential date nights and workshops. Please keep in mind our podcast is for information only and is not therapy. If you need professional support, we recommend visiting psychologytoday.com. And Cameron, I'm going to throw it over to you today for the big question.
Yeah, today's big question. How can modern couples climb the first mountain of how to make life work by managing challenges in the ever-increasing busyness of modern life in a way that doesn't cause resentment and keeps them connected? It's my pleasure today to welcome Nate Klemp, a truly special guest. He is a New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur, and he's an acclaimed expert on mindfulness and relationships. Nate and his wife, Kaylee, wrote an outstanding book on relationships called The 80-80 Marriage, and they're currently working on a book called Busy Love, which is due to come out on Valentine's Day 2027 from Penguin Life, so mark your calendars. You can follow Nate's work by subscribing to the free Klemp Insights newsletter at 8080marriage.com. Nate lives in Colorado with his dynamic and wonderful wife, Kaylee, and their daughter. He holds a PhD in philosophy from Princeton and a bachelor's degree from Stanford. And in his free time, he likes hiking, running, and going to Taylor Swift concerts with his daughter. Nate, thank you for joining us today.
It's so good to be here with the two of you. Really excited about this conversation.
We are too. Nate, I'd love to just start. Can you tell us how you got to be interested in working with and writing about couples? Because when I, first learned about you in a professional capacity, because we go way back, we may get to that on this podcast, but you were this kind of mindfulness expert. And then all of a sudden it seemed like a bit of a detour into a new field.
Yes, and before that, when I actually knew Cameron, I was more of a philosophy expert. So that was my original training, was in political philosophy. And I wrote a book called The Morality of Spin, which Cameron is one of 7 readers of that book. So I'm always grateful for him for that honor. But yeah, about 4 years into being a professor, I got really interested in the idea of philosophy, not so much as an intellectual or theoretical discipline, but as a way of life. And that led me to get really interested in yoga and mindfulness, and wrote a book called Start Here with a co-author that's basically about how to apply basic tools of mindfulness. We started a business around that as well. And so mindfulness was really the center of my world. Meanwhile, my wife, Kaylee, is an executive coach. She's very interested in leadership, systems like the Enneagram. How do you make better relationships in the workplace? And one day about 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, we were on a hike in Boulder. It's our favorite hike called Gregory Canyon. And we just started talking about relationships and how all of the people we knew, and certainly we were experiencing this as well, there was this like very unique challenge, which seemed to be something like the following: that we're the first generation in all of human history trying to figure out how to have egalitarian relationships. So, when we think about our parents and our grandparents, they were moving toward this, but I think we're the first generation that's really grappling with this. And we thought about all the great marriage books, and they're awesome marriage books, but those books are more about the internal game of relationships. And we started to think, well, wouldn't it be interesting to write about this like bigger, like cultural backdrop that we're working against? And as we started to look at our own experience and we ended up interviewing about 100 people for the book, we realized that there was this fundamental like default pattern that kept arising, which was people are trying to be equal and in love. And the way in which we do this habitually is to make everything perfectly 50-50 fair. And the unconscious belief is that if we can achieve perfect fairness, my balance sheet of everything I do is fair and equal to your balance sheet of everything you do, then somehow we're going to like ascend into the heavens of marital bliss and we're going to have amazing sex and everything's going to be great and we're never going to fight again. And the paradox there, which I think we all know, is that like the more you actually strive for that goal, the more you do fight, the more conflict you have. So that was basically, it was just an idea. And we really weren't in a place to write the book. And in fact, I'm surprised that we were able to get the book sold. Somehow we were. It was fortuitous. But that was basically the genesis of our work in relationships. And the idea behind our book is how do we answer that question of how you become equals and in love in a way that's more skillful than this default pattern of fairness?
Love that insight. It's yeah, that fairness does not equal mind-blowing love, and maybe fairness doesn't even equal equality in the best way. I'd love to just dig in a little bit deeper on that of what do you think the overlap is between your work on mindfulness and your work on relationships?
I think there's a huge overlap there. We were actually just talking about this idea from my first book, Start Here, where the key concept in the whole book is notice, shift, rewire, which is basically just a three-part expression of basic mindfulness. Notice, become aware of what's happening in your mind, what's happening in your body. Psychologists call this meta-awareness. Shift out of your default patterning to some other more productive, more skillful state, and then rewire to just like stay with that. And so if that's the essence of mindfulness, and I think it is really, it's like, how do you observe what's happening non-judgmentally in the present moment from that place of meta awareness? That's mindfulness. If we then go over to relationships, the whole game is catching yourself in that space between stimulus and response where you actually have a choice and not following the default reactive path of habit, because we all know what happens when we do. I mean, that's really abstract. So let's make this like down to earth. What happens when we don't notice and we get caught? Well, that's when our partner says something like, hey, why do you load the bowls in the dishwasher this way? That's wrong. When you don't catch yourself, that's when you launch the zinger like, what are you, my boss now? What are you trying to control me? And then we all know what happens next. There's a fight. And so like so much of relationships is about that primary skill of just being able to see what's happening in our mind and body. And instead of reacting, responding more skillfully. So I think they're totally connected, and mindfulness, I think, builds the skill. So you're better at other skill in relationships, and being in a relationship, I think, makes you more mindful in various ways. So they're definitely synergistic.
Great response. Well, and I like the way you teed up the dishwasher fight. So, I mean,
Everybody's had that fight, right?
yeah, I mean, you've written a book on relationships. You've got another one coming out. You're a mindfulness expert. So you've probably got it all figured out, right? There's like no embarrassing stories you could share about your marriage with Kaylee with us?
No, we do not have it all figured out. And I actually would say if anybody says they have it all figured out, you should be highly suspicious of them.
Agreed,
You
agreed.
probably shouldn't read their book or take advice from them. So no, we do not have it figured out. And I was actually just thinking about this. We had a great fight on Friday. We don't fight as much as we used to, but Friday night was like the perfect circumstance. So Kaylee had been away for 4 days in New York, Chicago, basically hadn't slept. She was coming back Friday morning, landed at 6:45 a.m. in Colorado. Meanwhile, my daughter is sick, determined to go to this birthday party on Friday night. That ends up going to 10:30 at night. I let Kaylee, go to sleep early. My daughter then wakes up at 1 a.m. with this like horrible fever. She's got nausea. So I'm like, hey, you keep sleeping, Kaylee. I got our daughter. I tend to our daughter for like an hour, come back. And then when we're waking up, I hear Kaylee rustling on the other side of the bed. And I say to her, I'm going to keep sleeping. And later that day, when we're both tired because we haven't slept the night before, Kaylee says, I felt really judged when you said I'm going to keep sleeping because I actually wasn't going to get up. And it was one of those moments where we were both just like not in the right place, like a healthy state of mind. And so we had this whole argument where I'm like, I'm sorry, I was up in the middle of the night. Like I stayed up till 10:30, then woke up at 1 a.m. All I was trying to say is I didn't sleep at all. I'm going to keep sleeping. Like, how is that a judgment? Like, where's the negative judgment there? So we got in this whole thing. But then I think the important part is that the next morning we revisited, we circled back because, like, I like to say it's not a problem that you have conflict or you argue. It is a problem if you never circle back and you never clean it up. So the next morning we were on a hike and I said something like, "Hey, that fight we had last night was totally absurd. And I apologize for my part in that. I just, was tired." She apologized for her part. We then kind of played back through it and like we couldn't even really figure out what we were arguing about. But it ended up that we were laughing and it turned into this kind of like funny moment. So I would say, like, if there's a moral in that, it's just that fighting is not bad, conflict is not bad, but not cleaning it up can lead to some really serious problems over time. So I would encourage people, like, when that does happen, you can clean it up the next day. You can come back, you can own your part, you can express what you were feeling at the time, and then try to like embrace at the end.
I love that you refer to that as the perfect fight, right? Because it's these little gold nuggets of opportunity to explore, reconnect, and learn more about how we're engaging in those instances. So I love that. I'd love to hear and tell the audience more about the 80/80 marriage, because I think what you're talking about is sort of updating the operating system of modern day marriage, that it's operating on outdated systems, right? And that the 80/80 marriage can be that sort of update. And so I'd love to hear how you came up with that. What is it?
So there's kind of like three models that we like to talk about when it comes to relationships. One is the 80/20 model, 50/50 model, 80/80 model. So it can help contextually to sort of draw out some of those other models. So 80/20, think 1950s, one partner does 80%, the other partner does 20%. And these percents are like the percent of wholesale contribution. So not just like stuff around the house, but like emotional labor, like trying to sustain the relationship, etc. Usually it's the woman doing the 80% historically. Usually the man gets away with like 20%. That's kind of the model of a lot of our grandparents and great grandparents. 50/50, I talked about a moment ago, is the default model of our modern age, where the idea is like, hey, let's just make everything perfectly 50/50 fair. And the problem with that model is, well, there are a couple of problems. One is that we're really bad at estimating how much we actually do. And this was the insight that actually led me to get really excited about the idea of presenting an alternative to 50/50. I remember I was talking to a psychologist at the University of Chicago, John Cacioppo, who's no longer alive, but he was like, this is the fundamental thing that's happening in relationships. People report they're doing 60. If you actually study it, they're doing 40. Why is that? Well, there's two things. One is there's this cognitive bias that psychologists call availability bias, which is just a way of saying like all the wonderful things that I do to support my marriage and my life, all of that data is available to me. But when it comes to what Kaylee's doing, most of it is actually happening in the darkness. I don't see it. So I have a tendency to underestimate what she does. And then there's another bias, the overestimation bias, where they've done all this time study research that we tend to be really bad at estimating the actual amount of time we spend on childcare and housework. So I do dishes for 45 minutes, but it's actually more like 20 because we tend to overestimate. So what that all means is like, we say we're aspiring toward 50/50, but we're horrible at making these assessments of how much we've actually done and what is or isn't fair. It's the perfect setup for a fight. So how do you then break out of that stalemate? Well, the idea of 80/80 is, what if we were to just radically shift the goalpost and say, don't strive for 50%, strive for 80%, which is kind of weird and the math doesn't work and we know it doesn't work, but love is kind of weird too, right? And so the basic idea is to shift your mindset in relationship around how much you contribute, how much you appreciate your partner, how much you're revealing to your partner, from 50% to something more like 80%. And just really quickly, one thing that often comes up is people will be like, well, okay, kind of that's cool in theory, but really that's a recipe for becoming a doormat. I'm just going to get taken advantage of, whatever. The response to that, which I think is really important, is that what really gets this off the ground is the idea that in relationships, your mindset is contagious. So if your mindset is that 50-50 fairness mindset, like that is contagious, your partner will mirror that back to you at every turn. What makes this 80-80 mindset shift really powerful and work practically is that your generosity turns out to be contagious. It opens up a space for your partner to be more generous in turn. And that has the ability to create a kind of upward spiral in your relationship that can be really powerful.
Kind of similar question, right? As like, what else did you learn as you were writing the book? And what are the top 2 or 3 most critical tools that you and Kaylee developed for modern couples?
Yeah. So the first one I would say is that mindset shift from fairness to radical generosity, 50-50 to 80-80. The other one, though, that I think is really important, and this is actually going to be a little bit more prominent in our next book, Busy Love, is an idea that we started to see when we were talking to couples and interviewing couples. And we would ask them a question like, how did you decide who does what in your relationship? Like, how did you arrive at your roles? And almost every couple, with some exceptions, actually, same sex couples were often the exception to this. But most heteronormative couples would say some version of like, I don't know. We just kind of winged it, like we just landed here by accident, basically. And so we started to call that the wing it approach. And it applies to roles, but if you start to look more carefully, I think it applies to almost all areas of relationship life. So for many couples, they adopt a wing it approach to priorities. Like, we don't need to set our priorities. We'll just let, our cell phones and the random invitations and requests of our family members dictate what we do and why, or boundaries, or power, or sex. Like the wing it approach is sort of another default pattern that we see happening in relationships. And so in the 80-80 marriage, and then in our next book, we spend a lot of time talking about, okay, you can wing it, but there are real costs to that. And especially as life gets more complicated and you add kids and you add businesses and all the things, there's this really powerful transformation that you can unlock if you shift from winging it to something that's more intentional, to loving each other by accident, to something more like loving each other by design. Like actually setting up structures in your life that help you see what you value, help you determine priorities, help you determine your roles, help you set boundaries with others in your life. So that would be the other big insight. And I think this is actually in a lot of different marriage thinkers and marriage authors, this idea of like the fundamental shift is to go from unconscious to conscious, accident to design. And if you can do that, like that's another huge way of unlocking more time and space for love and intimacy.
So be intentional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Nate, as you mentioned, I guess I was one of 7 readers of your first book.
Yes,
So
thank you very much for that.
yeah. And Nate and I, we played in the jazz group together in college. I don't know if we'll get to that on this episode, but going back to when I first met you, you were clearly a very talented person. But yeah, you PhD in philosophy, so I assume academic, you're gonna get kind of buried in some department in some university somewhere. And then you came out with this book that was a New York Times bestseller. You've moved, start here, you moved into the relationship space. And now you seem like you have this big new area that you want to explore with your book, Busy Love. So I'm curious, why do you think this is needed? What do you think it has to say that hasn't already been said about relationships?
Yeah, well, this was a similar process, I guess, in the sense that Kaylee and I were looking at our life and our relationship together. And I always think that's where the best ideas always start at home. You have a problem you want to solve, you can't find the tools to solve it. And so this new book came out of a similar place where we were thinking about when we were younger and we were engaged, and the ethos of our life it was all about love, those early days. I think everybody can relate to that. We would say, I love you constantly. And, we're one of those obnoxious couples that held hands on their way to dinner. And one thing we almost never talked about was busyness, because I was a grad student. I had tons of time. She was starting her business. We didn't have a house. We didn't have a kid. We didn't have anything really. And over time in our own life, we started to notice that all that love talk was still there, but it was sort of being like pushed down under the weight of this other topic of conversation that was busyness, just the frenetic pace of life, that the more complexity we added, the more busyness we seem to have in our life. And again, we noticed this was happening for us, but also when we would coach couples, we would hear them talk about how busy they were as one of their primary complaints. When we would go out to dinner with friends, we would hear them talking about how busy they were. I was just at a volleyball game and sitting there next to one of my daughter's friends' parents. First thing I asked her, how's everything going? Busy, first word out of her mouth. So it seems as though there's this phenomenon that we're so busy and we talk so much about busyness that it's almost like pushed out of the conversation the topic of love and connection. And so the next book is really an attempt to, one, offer tools for mitigating the sheer chaos and busyness of everyday life, but two, to give people like a really practical toolkit for rituals, habits, practices that you can use to stay connected in the midst of everyday life busyness.
That is certainly a question I hear a lot, particularly from other parents of young children. I had a conversation just a few months ago with two of my friends who were just in the thick of it, and they look forward to your tools. I'll send the book along.
Nice.
To move from busy love to the busyness of business, I would love to know, Nate, you and Kaylee are both entrepreneurs. You both have, I believe, not worked for anyone for a very long time. I'm curious, how's that roller coaster of business, of sometimes really good outcomes, but sometimes, not making hardly any money, or, potentially even like big negative liabilities, and just the volatility of workloads where you don't just show up and have a 9 to 5. How has that impacted your relationship? And do you have any advice for other couples who are, one or both of them are entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, I know that that is the central topic of your work and the podcast. So that's one that I think is fun to explore. And it is fun to explore also because, as you mentioned, Kaylee and I have been entrepreneurs for quite a while, ever since I left my job as a professor. So I would say a couple things. One is that there's an ethos of support that I think is really important for entrepreneurial couples. What I mean by that is, I remember interviewing a couple, and this man was telling me about how every win for his partner was a loss for him. This was not just a one off, by the way. There were a number of couples I talked to like this. There was another woman who said, my husband sees my success as an affront to his manhood. So like there's a way in which the culture of relationships where you have two striving entrepreneurs can turn into a culture of competition where it's like this zero-sum game, and it's mostly hidden, but there is this subtle rivalry against each other, and it's not very loving. It's not very conducive to good intimacy, as you can imagine. So I think the first thing I would say is to really look at the underlying culture and atmosphere of your relationship, and to push out of your comfort zone at times to that place of like really being for the other person and radically in support of the other person, even though you may feel some degree of jealousy or some degree of, whatever it is, right? Like to just establish like we are for each other. That feels like super important right out of the gate. And then a secondary thing, which is maybe a little bit more superficial, is it's really complicated, at least in my experience, to be in relationship where you're both trying to do different things that are both hard and require a lot of time and a lot of logistics to get off the ground. And so I would say that there's something really important about being incredibly precise about logistics, which doesn't sound very fun, but like, I remember there was a time where Kaylee was traveling for her work 3 days each week, and I was traveling for my work probably once every couple weeks. And we just got into so much conflict when we got sloppy around logistics. But when we got very precise about like who's going where, who's watching the kids, how's this all playing out, what are the roles, etc., that really started to streamline everything so that we could have more of those moments of connection. So those would be my two thoughts. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Honestly, I love everything that you've said. And I think one of the things that actually stands out to me the most was your comment around anybody who tells you that they have it all figured out, you should probably run from. I mean, really, truly, right? That that anybody who's an expert in this field is always doing their own work, continuing to do their own work, and nobody's got it together totally, right? None of us are immune from the human experience, right? And so I love everything that you're saying and how it's really all brought to fruition by your own experience. And so I'd love actually if you could share with the audience some of the big pain points that you've had in your relationship. Like if you could have a
Mhm.
do-over with anything in your relationship, what would that thing be?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is extended family.
Mm,
And maybe that's unique to us. I don't think it is. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. But for us, we actually, Kayla and I both grew up in the same town, Boulder, Colorado. We moved back to Boulder, Colorado. So we have both sets of parents here in Boulder. We have her brother here in Boulder. We have lots of friends here in Boulder. And I would say the most explosive fight for us early on was this question of how do we spend time with each other's families and trying to make it fair? So back to that 50-50 piece,
mm,
where it's like, wait a minute, we're going to Michigan with your family. We're going to throw your parents this big surprise party, and we're going to ski with them every other weekend. And we're going to see my parents for one weekend. That's outrageous. Like, that is, how can that be? Right. Like, so we had probably 10,000 variations on that fight. And I think the way we finally started to let that one go is it's this shift that's subtle, but we started to realize that we were viewing ourselves as our parents' kids. And what I mean by that is there was a part of each of us that was trying to be like the good, compliant child to our parents. In a way, totally unconsciously, we were like prioritizing our parents above each other. Again, not consciously, but unconsciously. So we were basically being our parents' kids and then having these arguments as two parents' kids. And so the shift there, and this would be my mulligan, my do-over, because that's what you asked. I would make the shift earlier. The shift is from being your parents' kids to being an adult. And what I mean by an adult is like, we are in control of our life. Like me and Kaylee, that's the power center. We're not diplomats negotiating on behalf of each of our rival families or conflicting families. We are the power center. We get to make the decisions. It's like a reversal of the hierarchy or a reversal of the dynamics of power there. But that one took like 20 years for us to get to. It really did.
yeah.
We had so many fights, so many tears, so many just like terrible, hard conversations. So that would be the one.
Well, I think the powers that be in the universe have a lovely way of continuing to present us with the lessons that we need, right?
And we're still
Until we
dealing with
figure
it.
out.
It's still there. We're better at it, but it is still there. It's never going away.
Yeah. You may be able to navigate that a little bit more efficiently though, right? And have the awareness around what's going on, which I think is a little
100%. So it feels totally different, even though it's still there as a perpetual problem.
yeah. So, flip side of that then, what do you consider your biggest success in your relationship? What are you most proud of?
I would say, well, part of the story of our relationship that I haven't told yet is 2 years into our relationship, we got very, very close to just like getting a divorce, calling it quits. So I was 28. We were both 28. I was in my last year of graduate school. I got in a pretty serious bike accident. I had a concussion, which led to quite an extended period of like anxiety and depression. So my life spiraled. And Kaylee, being my partner, her life spiraled as well. And we got to this place of feeling like we didn't even really know each other. Like, this isn't the person I married, kind of thing.
Mm.
And there was about a 2-week period there. We call this the dark year, where it really felt like this is not going to work. And I think what I'm most proud of is I'm not sure what it was, but there was some part of both of us that was like, we're going to try. We're going to see if we can make this work. It was like, even though it seemed totally hopeless, let's see if we can just keep going. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, if you find yourself in hell, just keep going. That was the experience. And we were able to very slowly work our way out of it. It took years for sure. But as I think about our life and our relationship, without that moment, none of the other amazing things would be possible. Like writing books together, having a great life together, having a child together, none of that would have been possible. So there's something about just this willingness to be like, we're going to put it all on the line. We're going to keep working, even though it's not clear how we get out of this. We're just going to like see if it's possible. And so I like that story too, because I just know that sometimes as a relationship author, people might get the impression that it's been easy, and it really hasn't. And so if somebody's in a really hard spot listening to this, I like to offer that story as a, like, we have been there, like in the absolute worst of it. And there is a path out often.
Nate, that is a great story. I've been looking for a way to work this into our podcast. So Nate does this awesome newsletter called Klemp Insights. It's one of the few, we all get too many. It's one of 3 that I consistently read. And Nate sent one out maybe like a month ago that it was funny. I actually emailed him. I said, you need to include this in your book, the next book. And then my wife, Anna, told me that later. So can you quick tee up this? We've gone back to your like story of origin with you and Kaylee.
Yeah.
Let's go back to our past lives and how they might be impacting our relationship today.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about, it was a newsletter called Is the Fridge Full?
It sure was.
So we have a joke in our house. It's a really morbid joke. So I hope this doesn't land wrong for anybody. But the basic idea is like, whatever you died of in your past life is the thing that like brings you anxiety in your current life. In our family, we joke that I must have died of starvation in a past life, because when the fridge is starting to get empty, I just feel like a little bit unsettled. And when I go out to Costco and I just have like a full fridge and I know we have food to eat, like I feel safe. I feel just like I can relax. And Kaylee has more of like a cleanliness thing. So we think she might have died of dysentery or something like that, living off the streets or something. Who knows, right? But for her, her place of safety is like the house is clean, things are tidy, we're not living in filth. Like, yes, I can now relax. And the argument we were trying to make in this newsletter was that it's actually really useful to ask that question in your relationship. And you don't have to ask the weird version of like, what do you think you died of in a past life? But it could be more like, hey, what is it that makes you feel on edge? The environmental situational conditions that make you feel like, oh, I'm just like a little nervous and I don't feel safe. And then like moving that from unconscious to conscious is a really powerful thing, because you can then make sure you satisfy your own needs. But then as a partner, there's kind of like a 5 love languages type move here where you can love your partner by filling the fridge or like filling the gas tank or cleaning the sink or whatever it is. So that was the idea.
I thought it was brilliant, Nate, because it sort of like makes it humorous, right? So Anna immediately
Right.
texted me. She said, I think I died in a past life because somebody left a piece of paper on the floor and I like slipped on it and like cracked my head open.
Yeah.
And I immediately said, like, in a past life, I actually didn't die. I lived a really long life, but I failed to save properly. And I had to watch everyone around me die because I couldn't pay for their health insurance. And so I was alone till 120 because I failed to save properly.
But just broke, right?
Because I was just broke. And yeah, it sort of gets out of the like, is it right or wrong to make the house super clean or to be, super aggressive about saving? It doesn't really matter, right? It's just sort of like, as you said, this is like something that really matters to me, but it did it in a way that I thought was very like warm and humorous. I want to briefly ask, because I always love it when people interview the interviewers like you just did,
Okay.
Nate. So back to like, what do we think? I'll just quick share and I'd love to hear your reaction. I think from my work, there's 2 big themes I want to highlight, which is that your relationship with your business may be the single biggest factor in your relationship with your spouse. So in other words, if your business is something that you love and are passionate about, but it is not fused with your identity, it is not the only place that you get satisfaction and enjoyment from life, then that's very different if it sort of becomes like the whole of who you are. And then I think the second one really ties with what you said, Nate, of how important it is if one person is an entrepreneur, and it could even be both, but to be able to support the entrepreneur emotionally in their business, which is so hard because the ups and downs, can just wreck work-life balance. They can wreck financial stability. But at the end of the day, I think most entrepreneurs are building their business because they love it. And so it's kind of like being in a relationship, with a jazz musician and saying, yeah, I'm, married to so and so and I hate their music. Like it's just hard to imagine that relationship going well. And then Jamie, do you want to quick say like one or two like key hypotheses you have so we can get Nate's reaction to them?
Yeah, I think, I actually talk about this quite a bit, but just this whole concept that the circular conversations about the dishes, for example, are not actually about the dishes, right? That it's about the representation of the dishes in the marriage and that there's always those opportunities. But I love the perfect fight that you use, right? Because it's how do you then come back to that and have those conversations in a different way? Like if you're coming up against the same conflict for 20 years, perhaps we need to shift how we're having that conversation, right? So it's being aware, one, that these things are continuing to occur. And I think once you see them, you can't unsee them, right? Once you know that they're there, you see them everywhere. And so your ability to just sort of fly through without paying attention to these things is suddenly gone. But once you have the awareness, what do you do with it, right? There's lots of tools out there. So I love everything that you said, Nate, really. I'm excited to read the new book.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love both of those ideas, like this idea of the context surrounding the fight as like the real thing. Because that is just this very strange part of being in a relationship is that it feels like the fights are about the fights, but they're never about the fights. It's always like the context within which all of this is happening. I love that. And then Cam, I do love the idea of like, I think there's this way that people want to separate business and love, business and relationships. And what I heard you saying, which is an idea that we talk about a lot as well, is like, I think the shift is actually to like merge them a little more in the following sense that like our relationships are such a part of who we are and business might be such a part of who we are as well. Like, can we see those as somehow intertwined? And when we do, that can be a really powerful thing to almost think of your business as a part of the creative juice that's like in your life that, that's connected to your relationship, that there's not like this clear separation, at least emotionally.
And Nate, I believe you named your LLC after like your family. You like
Yes.
smashed all your names together.
Yeah.
What is it?
Kajona LLC. So K,
Jonah.
Kaylee, NA for Nate, JO for our daughter.
I love that. All right, let's do some rapid fire questions. Nate, if you had a different career, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, I think I'd be an entrepreneur in the natural food space. And this is something I'm actually flirting with a little bit right now, potentially. So I'm actually playing with this idea. But yeah, I think I'd want to create a natural food product.
That's, I mean, so like bold for Boulder. I love that.
Yeah,
Defying stereotypes.
exactly. Like, I guess we are like Kale Valley or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what would be like, whatever the food equivalent of the Silicon Valley is. That's Boulder. So.
That's Boulder. What would you say is the best advice you ever received?
Well, so I really like this line from Byron Katie: "The world is a mirror image of your own mind." I just think that's like incredible advice for all of life, that whatever's happening in your mind, however you're approaching the world, like that's going to be mirrored back to you everywhere. So I think it's great relationship advice, but also just like showing up at the store, like, why is everybody so angry today? I wonder, maybe that's just a mirror of what's happening on in here. So I just think that's a cool idea to play with, and to really play with like, oh, the converse could be true. If I just like play with alternative mindsets, I can create a whole different world that I live in. How cool is that?
I love that. So Nate, also, I've seen you've got some pretty good gear sometimes. So if you had to wear a hat with one word on it for the rest of your life every day, what would that word be?
I actually do have a hat with open on it, which was another book that I wrote, but that's too easy. I've always liked the word iconoclast. I think because I was taking the PSATs when I was like 15, and the question was, Thelonious Monk is an example of a blank. And I was a jazz musician at the time, like Cam, and I just thought like, oh, that's so cool. The SAT's asking about Thelonious Monk, iconoclast. That is a beautiful word. I love what it stands for. Like, be different, be your own person, be creative. So I'm gonna go with that.
Iconoclastic love. That'll be our next book. All right. Right. What if we were to sneak out to your house and open the trunk of your car? What will we find inside it?
You would find reusable shopping bags, one of those like emergency roadside kits, and maybe hiking poles, depending on the day.
All right, well prepared. Nate, let's do our final take. Is there anything you didn't get to or anything that you really want to reiterate for our audience?
No, I think this has just been really fun. Like, what a cool conversation. I really appreciate the two of you for having me, and really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think this is an important topic. This whole idea of like how we can have better relationships, especially in the field of entrepreneurship where there's so much external pressure on the system. So, yeah, just really grateful to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Nate. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.